There he is. Hey.
Hi, Swami.
How you doing, Mike? Dr. Detroit. I'm always glad to have Dr. Detroit around, and your lovely wife,
Gail.
Gail. And the name escapes me. So Gail. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I have my geezer excuse when I forget people's names. So.
Yeah, that's okay.
Well, we pilgrimage to India, so for us to have a Swami on in Detroit is a big deal.
Okay, all right. Oh, and Chris is already here. How you doing, Chris? And Mickey Norris. Okay, Wilbur, our faithful Wilbur, and Mr. K, and Ed Ochoa. Okay, great, wonderful. And Wilbur, how are those plants doing? Did you rescue them?
Hey, Tipu, come here.
They rescued themselves. They stayed away from me. They're doing good now.
Okay. All right. Now he had some plant starts that he put in a potting medium, and then he fed them a compost tea, and it was way too much nourishment for them, and so they just kind of wilted on the over nourishment. So just letting them go by and be themselves, they've recovered. Well, that's good to hear.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Nikki.
Hey, Chris. Good to see everyone. And Chris, thanks for being here already.
Yeah,
exciting.
right.
Looking forward to this.
Nikki and Mickey.
Nikki, that's right.
Well, actually, you know what's really funny? I just discovered there's a woman in the world of cannabis whose name is Nikki, spelled the same as me, and her last name is Norris. So that's like if you took the two of us and put us together, you know?
Well, I don't know. They could never equal either of you. So. Right.
So let me see. That's a beautiful Shiva statue behind you, Chris.
Oh yeah, it's a white marble one. I got a few of those marbles and white marble ones. I got a bigger one, but it's too heavy to pack around and put anywhere.
Yeah. No, I love those.
So you're really into Shiva, I take it, from the Shivaratri and the Shiva statues and so on.
I like Shiva a lot. You know, out of all the different I guess religions and deities and stuff like that, that's probably the one I resonate with the most, you know, mostly because of the explicit cannabis connection, you know?
That's right. Yeah, he's also got other connection too, because some of the statues or images of Shiva have a datura plant in his head. Yeah. Right? And so he's also into that kind of psychedelics. Holy mackerel, who's that? Jack just let out a smoke. I can't believe the cloud he let go there. All right.
Hey, Heidi.
Heidi's there.
Heidi ho. Yeah, Shiva's the guy, you know, he's the man, or the god, I should say.
Right.
He can take over Indra after the Vedic period.
Is Heidi from Switzerland?
Right.
No, I'm from San Francisco.
Oh.
She just looks Swiss, that's all. That's it.
I guess.
Right. Yeah,
right.
You need the little braids. 2 little braids. Yeah, right.
And a dirndl. So
yeah, we got a lot of Shiva statues around here, Chris. Also big Shiva fans. We've got some of those big 1-ton ones from South India, black granite. Those are also nice. A little hard to move around. No, yeah.
All about Durga.
Yeah. And then we have she's got a Durga over there.
Oh,
right? Durga riding on the tiger.
Preparing bong, smoking a chillum, drinking bong.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, he's more actually really known for drinking palm with cannabis smoothie. More days we smoke more in his honor, but he was more of a drinker in that. But you know, when you drink that cannabis, it's really psychedelic. So, you know, a cannabis smoothie will take you right out of your body if you let it. So it's a psychedelic, which is stronger than a joint, that's for sure.
Yeah, the general historical view is that like smoking cannabis started to occur in pipes and joints and stuff after the discovery of tobacco smoking in the New World. And that prior to
Right.
that, although it could be burnt as an incense, it was generally consumed or drank or something like that. And, you know, you can't find images of pipes and bongs in art prior to that period, although there's obvious images of people drinking bong and stuff like that.
Right,
Huh.
right. Well, you know, medicine,
Cool.
I mean, paper wasn't invented until what, 1700 or something like that, cigarette papers. So yeah, they weren't smoking joints, that's for sure. But bowls, they probably had some sort of bowl, but like you say, it was more of an incense kind of thing where a whole bunch of people would be smoking incense. Not smoking, it'd be a group high in a hot box kind of thing.
So when did
Yeah.
they come up with the chillum then? When do you think the chillum came around? Was
That's
that
the
after
general,
tobacco?
like, okay, there's a little bit of debate about this, but the general view is that happened after tobacco smoking. And Indians here in North
Okay.
America, they had stone pipes very similar to chillums for smoking tobacco here. And you can't find archaeological evidence generally for this type of thing. There's a couple of exceptions. There's been a pipe bowl in Africa that's been dated, radiocarbon dated to about the 14th century, which would predate that. And there's claims of 13th century pipes in Spain. But these types of things, when you're dealing metal or rock or stuff like that, it gets pretty hard to be super accurate with the dates. And when you're dealing with dates that are so close, it's tough, right? But you know, there was like a big bunch of articles about Scythians having golden bongs, but this was like so they had gold cups that had residues of cannabis and opium. Somehow, somebody in the press misrepresented this as bongs, and then there's been this massive repeating through news sources of Scythian bongs, but they weren't bongs, they were cups and bowls, and they also had braziers for burning it. And then there's other things like people refer to smoking cups, which were like little braziers like this that you'd hold in your hand, and then you'd burn it, you know, and inhale above it, you know what I mean? But they call them
Oh,
pipe
wow.
cups sometimes, and so then this leads to confusion that they were, you know, using pipes that you inhale through a stem or something like that, but that's not the case. More like a little brazier that you inhaled over top of.
Huh.
Yeah, why don't you talk about the Scythians a little bit, because they keep coming up. And I studied history in college, and there was always this, oh, the Scythians this, the Scythians that, and they were always really kind of mysterious. Can you explain on that a little bit?
Well, you know, the Scythians were an Indo-European culture, and they grew out of earlier Indo-European cultures that had domesticated the horse and used cannabis. But the term is kind of a blanket term for a variety of Indo-European groups that were like in the Russian steppes and then over into Afghanistan, Persia, and all the way into India by the 2nd century BC. But they really dominated, say, from around, I don't know, 900 BC to about 200 BC was kind of their peak period. I doubt any people that we refer to as Scythians would refer to themselves as Scythians, because they were all these
Right.
tribal names, and they were connected by culture and language, right? But they would fight amongst each other and with other people. Sometimes they were more united than other times, but they were a major force in the ancient world and dominated large regions of the ancient world, and appear a lot in Greek writings. And Herodotus, the Greek historian, he wrote around 450 BC about a Scythian funerary ritual where they would throw cannabis, he said seeds, but it was like, a lot of these ancient references refer to seeds, but it's like seeded buds. They didn't know about sensimilia, and the seeds are covered with calyxes that are very full of resins and stuff like that, right? So he's referring to seeds. And a lot of these other references refer to seeds, but it's like seeded buds. And they throw these in a fire, then howl with joy. And this was thought to be purely mythological until in the 1940s, when a Russian archaeologist, Sergei Rudenko, in Perzak, he found a tomb that had all these implements in there, braziers with rocks, with burnt cannabis seeds, little tent-like structures. And the tents he found weren't that big. They were like, you know, like say like 6 foot tall teepees that you would like put your head inside after you got enough smoke in there, and then you'd take a big hit and pull your head back out, right? But it sounds like they had bigger ones as well. And they found cannabis in a number of Scythian tombs. And this is like, I don't know, say going from about 600 BC all the way to 500 AD. They found what they refer to as the Siberian ice princess in the Altai Mountains. And she was found with cannabis seeds, showing that this ritual had carried on. But this particular cultic use of cannabis in regards to like funerary type of rituals goes way back in Indo-European culture. And we have evidence out of like Romania and Moldova, which is thought to be the homeland of the Proto-Indo-European culture. I should probably say something here about Indo-European and Proto-Indo-European for people that don't know about that. But Indo-European language is thought to be the root language of French, English, German, you know, Spanish, Latin, but also Sanskrit and the Avestan language that the Avesta was written in Persia, and other languages as well. So cannabis use was already thousands of years old before all these languages split off from the Indo-European language, and was even older than what we refer to as the Indo-European language, and is thought to have been Proto-Indo-European. And that means it came out of the culture that this grew out of, right? And this is thought to be in like the Romania, Ukraine region. This is where we find the oldest possible evidence of ritual use of cannabis. And here in Romania, they found like a little brazier-like cup that I was talking about at a funeral site where cannabis seeds were burned. And they found a similar type of situation in Moldova, which kind of sits between there and Ukraine. And then they found bowls that were similar to those bowls in Ukraine, right? And this goes back to about 3,500, 3,000 BC. And it's interesting because these are the same people who are thought to have domesticated the horse as well. And the horse was thought to have been domesticated through the development of hemp rope, allowed it to corral and stuff like that. And this is also how like later groups like the Scythians were able to spread the ritual use of cannabis throughout the ancient world, right? Is through this high mobility, through the development of horseback riding, which seems to have coincided with the ritual use of cannabis. And
Chris, there's a debate about the source of that, because there's this book called The Wheel, the Horse, and Language, which discusses all this stuff about the steppes. And that general conclusion is that it came much further into Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Kazakhstan.
The Anatolian theory. Well, that you're
Yeah.
talking about the Anatolian theory, and Kunluf, I forget what his full name is there. I think that was his last name, who came up with that. He since said that's not the case because of DNA evidence that has shown that the Proto-Indo-European homeland was actually in the Ukraine region. And this is the main proponent of the Anatolian theory. I think it's Sir Edward Kunluf or something like that. I forget what his name was, but I'm pretty sure that's it. And he's since said that the steppes theory is actually due to the DNA evidence that they've studied that they've done is actually correct. And this goes into India. Now, there's a big controversy about this in India because Indian nationalists, they don't like the whole Aryan migration invasion theory very much, right? But the DNA evidence is there showing like 20% DNA in the population from this earlier kind of steppes region out of the Ukraine, Moldova. But it's all very complicated, right? Like, you know, you have situations where like the male DNA will be different than the female DNA because a lot of these people were nomadic warriors, right? You know what I mean? So you get a bunch of males going into an area and they're leaving their DNA, but it's not the female, you know what I mean? So I kind of think that what's really showing is just how old some of this stuff gets, right? Like, you know, a lot of this research about cannabis, say like with the Indo-European mummies in China, who I think are pretty central to this, right? Is that it's altered our ideas about the Silk Road. Before that, it was thought to have started about 200 BC. Now they've gone back 2,000 years earlier, possibly, based on evidence out of the trade taking place with these Indo-Europeans who were living in China in a few different locations, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask a question. So Chris, I have a question. Would the Aryans mostly be then in North India? I mean, South Indians are so different looking. Would that be?
Yeah,
not the
well,
same?
actually, I think it's South India, but it's mostly, the DNA is mostly the indigenous Indian culture, right? Not that. It's only like 20%, and and this is like thought to be the basis for the caste system, right? Like the lighter people are closer to the, the darker people are more. But then you have the situation where like Shiva and Kali are local deities, right? And I had thought a lot of the evidence was pointing to cannabis coming into India with the Aryans based on like strata samples of pollen in the soil and stuff like that it wasn't being grown there, and then it shows up around 1500 BC, and you start to see more and more as it goes on. But they have found evidence of cannabis in Harappa. There's like a single burnt cannabis seed that was found in Harappa, and some other like pollen sample or something like that from some strata. That doesn't mean that it was necessarily being grown and cultivated there. It could have been, maybe that trade routes were happening a lot earlier than we think. And, Scythians and other groups were kind of breaking into there, or Scythian-like groups, the people that preceded the Scythians, right? Now, my theory on like Soma and how this all interrelates to this, because it's like with the Indo-European and Proto-Indo-Europeans that Soma begins, right? And you have to look at like the common ancestry of the authors of the Avesta over in Persia and the Vedas in India, and the Hayoma and the Avesta and this has all been shown to come from some earlier identical source, right? And so this takes us into the Indo-Europeans, and we can see how far back that this ritual use of cannabis in funerary rituals goes with Indo-Europeans through this archaeological evidence that I'm talking about. And it was pretty widespread, because not only do we have like Scythians using it around the Black Sea and the Altai Mountains and the Siberian steppes, but we have another Indo-European culture in China. And this is like been research that's been turning up in the last couple of decades. And there's a few different sites in China where they have found Indo-European mummies. And these people, the DNA from them comes from Central Asia, Western Europe. They have artifacts from India at these sites and stuff like that. So they're part of a wide cultural network. And they were using cannabis in a very, very similar way to the Scythians. Whereas the Scythians had bronze braziers with heated rocks and threw cannabis on it. These people, sometimes known as the Jushi or Gushi, but it seems to be a combination of both Indo-Aryan and Indo-European people in this region, right? In different time periods, different things are happening. They're there from about 2000 to about 300 BC, when the indigenous Han Chinese kind of chased them out of there. And this probably has something to do with the loss of Soma's identity and stuff like that, which I'll get into. But at these sites, they found wooden braziers with rocks that had cannabis thrown at funerary rituals, very similar. So they'd already split off, a long time before from the Scythians, but it carried on the same tradition in this region. And there they found really well-preserved cannabis because of the desert environment there, where it can be 40 degrees in the summer, but minus 20 in the winter. But it's a very salty, dry environment. So things there have been very well preserved. And they found cannabis that was still green in tombs at these Jushi sites. And the interesting thing, they'd be able to do like cannabinoid profiles on this. And it was cultivated for quality cannabis. This was, not grown for fiber purposes. They were specifically grabbing the female plants, and they found cultivated, prepared female cannabis in a basket, about 2 pounds, in one tomb. In another tomb, there was female cannabis flowers laid across the body. And another tomb, it was mixed with a food product in a basket. So they found these, as well as about 15 of these braziers that cannabis was burnt in. And now these people were obviously, they were there for such a long time. They had some interaction with the indigenous Chinese there. And this is around the same time period where we really start to see cannabis references in Taoism. And in Taoism, it's referred to as a plant of immortality for seeking the spirits, very similar to it, right? And now the Chinese, they had names of cannabis because they have a long history of cannabis as well, right? Like, I'm just talking about spiritual use of cannabis here, but if we're talking about fiber and other uses of cannabis, it goes much, much further back in history from archaeological evidence. And China already had a really well-established relationship with fiber cannabis and food seed cannabis, right? But we start to see these references in Taoism to this plant of immortality, to burning an incense, to go to the land of the immortals and that type of stuff. And a Chinese name for cannabis, and they have very many names for cannabis, but always with this ma syllable in it, was huma. And this can mean fire cannabis, because they burnt it, right? Or it can mean Scythian cannabis. That's another way this was known. And these people were very, very connected with Scythian culture. That's probably who was doing a lot of the trade for them out of that region. And we know that they were in contact with another archaeological site over in Afghanistan called the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex. Now, a Russian archaeologist, Victor Serianati, working in the 80s and 90s, he found 3 temple sites there. And he claimed that these temple sites, 2 of them, these temple sites were like the size of a football field. And half of this, he said, was dedicated to preparing a sacred beverage. And in these temple sites, 2 of them, he said he found evidence in the gypsum where the drink would have been prepared, cannabis ephedra, and on the 3rd site also poppy, right? And now this has come into controversy because later researchers weren't able to replicate the results of the Russians scientists involved. And this is because, according to Serianati, like Russian archaeologists don't have the same sort of budget as American or European ones. And stuff's just getting left right out in the desert sun. And so the stuff that got sent off to be tested, the same gypsum they got results from, the other people that weren't able to do it, and they kind of wrote it off, the Russians wrote it off as due to the age and being exposed to the sun. And also there were seed impressions in the gypsums, and the other Europeans that weren't able to get the results from that, they said that they were too small to be cannabis seeds. This is not the case. And they found similar small seeds at Scythian sites, right? Now, Serianati goes on and on about the connection of Scythians to this particular site. And one of the nicknames of the Scythians was Heoma Barga. And ancient texts refer to how they would both burn Heoma and drink it. And we can see from artifacts that they both burned and drank cannabis, because we have the gold cups and other bone cups that cannabis drinks were prepared in, and braziers, which it was burnt in. And so a etymologist, linguist, Mandy Hassan, in the 80s had a theory that this Chinese term, huma, had been picked up by Aryan traders, and this came into the Bactria Margiana region and became Heoma. And this was before all this other archaeology was known, before they found these Indo-European mummies in China, where we, and these guys are often referred to as Tocharian, it's the Aryans that brought, Soma in, and the Aryans, right, in the Tocharian name goes back to a similar ancient language group that split off from the Indo-European languages quite early, right? And so my view is that, and another thing that they found at these Chinese burial sites was ephedra. And this was also part of the drink. And Mandy Hassan's theory, he says that there's an interesting relationship between cannabis and ephedra in the Chinese language. One is huma, and the other one's mahua. They're mirror images of each other, right? And they kind of have a yin-yang kind of relationship, with one being a very energizing herb, one being more relaxing, right? Now, Mandy Hassan, before the discovery of these tombs and the cannabis and all that, he had said that the name of cannabis had somehow gotten transferred onto ephedra, because ephedra is still used as hayoma in Zoroastrian rites. And we know that, you know, and there's some evidence that it was still used in India for a long time after. But that there's no real need for that when we see that now the new archaeology where cannabis was being part of that, and that the two were used in combination, right? And so I think that what the evidence is starting to show archaeologically is that this Chinese term huma came into Bactria margiana archaeological complex, became hayoma, and then through other dialectic changes into Sanskrit becomes soma. And then we see the disappearance of soma in late period Vedic texts. And a lot of it is got to do with the poor quality of soma that was arriving from where it was being brought in from. It was becoming lesser and lesser quality. Substitutes were becoming into place. The Book of Manu talks about this. The Patatha Brahmana talks about this. And also, there was like heavy taxes on this, on all aspects of Vedic life at this time period. Everything you did had some sort of like payment that you had to make the Vedic priests, and some ritual that went with it. The soma had to be consecrated properly. Everybody had to be paid. The guy bringing it in, the seller, all this type of stuff. And this is a lot combination of things, as well as likely when the Jushi got chased out of China by the indigenous Chinese and Confucianism starts to rise. Confucianism is a very sober religion, does not want all this shamanic cannabis use and other entheogenic use in it. And that all kind of gets shut down in this time period. The Indo-Europeans there kind of get pushed out. You know, there's texts from the time period that talk about the massacre of 200,000 people in these areas, wow. Right? You know what I mean? Indo-European people, bearded people that were living in China. So it was a massive thing, right? And this probably combined with the popularity of cannabis that was increasing in the regions in between is likely what led to a disappearance for a time before the indigenous Indian cultivation and stuff like that really took root.
Could you talk about the Soma and the Vedas, the Rig Veda and so on, where it shows up and how they used it and so on, primarily as a drink?
Yeah. You know, the best book for like descriptions of the actual plant is the 10th Mandala of the Rig Veda. And R. Gordon Wasson, in order to make his whole argument of Soma, he had to leave out that particular document, right? And in the I'll see if I can get you some quotes here from.
Well, he was the one who said that Soma was mostly a mushroom.
Yeah.
Amanita muscaria, and it doesn't really fit the description at all of what they're talking about.
No, it's like my favorite verse, and I'll just bring something up here. Give me 1 second. Is in the 10th Mandala, and it completely, you know, I think there's this one verse that ties up the whole thing really, and describes the description and everything. Sorry, it's taking me a second here. My computer's giving me grief.
Do you need to share the screen? Is that what you want to do?
Oh, no, that's all right. But I do have a bunch of stuff on my computer if you do want me to show some images. Give me 1 second. Okay, so this is from the Rig Veda 10.9.4. And this is describing both Soma and its preparation. The rocks that are being described were used for pressing or grinding the Soma. And so this is from Rig Veda 10.9.4. Let these stones speak, ye solid, quick-moving stones. You utter the noise of praise, full of the Soma juice. They roar like 100, like 1,000 men. They cry aloud with green-tinted faces. Obtaining the sacrifice, the pious stones partake of the sacrificial food. They speak, they received in their mouths the sweet Soma juice, chewing the branch of the purple tree. The voracious bulls have bellowed. Splitting but unsplit, you O stones, enjoying the soma, flowing green with soma. They have made heaven and earth resound with their clamor. The stones proclaim it with their clamor at the issue of the soma juice. Like cultivators sowing the seed, they devouring the soma mix it and do not hurt it. Proclaim the praise of the stone, which has diffused the soma juice. Let the honored stones resolve. Now, that's clearly referring to it as both green and purple, which, are colors of ripe cannabis indica. And the preparation is very similar to the preparation of bong that is still taking place here with the mortar and pestle, right? And Elaine Danilo, the Indologist, very well known, Ale Basham, have all made the same comparison to the preparation as described in that Vedic text and the preparation of bong in the modern day, right? And now Avestan text, they also refer to it as clearly as a green plant and refer to the pressing of Haoma, which is probably a very similar progress. But if you want me to share screens, I can show some pictures of the Bactria margiana archaeological complex and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, we can, let's see, how do we do that for him? Jack, can we do that for him?
It looks like I could do it right here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
There you go.
so I got it. I'll give, hopefully Jack's listening and I'll give him some directions.
Yeah, you should be able to navigate it yourself, Chris. We can see just what you're doing.
Okay, sure. Okay, so this is Professor Victor Sarianati, and he's at one of the temple sites there at the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex. This is a reconstruction of one of the temple sites. You can get some idea of how big it is from that. These are the seed impressions that he found in gypsum, and you can see the cannabis style seed there. And this will give you some idea of the variation of cannabis seeds. These small seeds up here are actually recovered from a Scythian site. And
Wow.
these are tools that were used in things like that were used, that were found at the site, bits of rock with the impressions, that sort of stuff. And this is a close-up. These bone cups here that you see with the eyeballs, they actually had opium residues in it. But this is actually a filtration device. And it's very similar. This is from 1625, a detail from a painting called Fakirs Prepare Bong. And you can see this very similar device right here in the center of the paper. This is from 1625. So, 3,600 years later. This is the full painting, Fakirs Prepare Bong. They're also smoking it in a water pipe here, stripping it off of cannabis stalk, grinding it up here in the top pictures. This is an illustration of Shiva preparing bong with just a simple rocks, a flat rock and another rock to grind it, very similar to the description we saw from the Vedas there. This is Nihang Sikhs. They're preparing cannabis here for their sacred drink, which is called Sukhadan. And this huge thing he is holding here is actually a mortar, and he's grinding it in there for the preparation of it.
Wow.
And this is like some illustrations, people grinding up bong and preparing it and filtering it, all very similar to the type of process that these tools indicate. Okay, I'll stop share there and we can wrap some more. So yeah, that's like, I think this is pretty major because, like if we could show that cannabis was part of the Soma and Haoma, when you think about the religions that sprung out of that traditional use, the Zoroastrian religion, which is still celebrated today and had a huge influence on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Taoism in China, with these early references from the same time period, probably influenced from these Indo-Europeans in China, Sikhism, where we can still see the continued use, Hinduism, where it's still used today in a similar ritual manner, but taken in honor of Shiva. That's pretty wild stuff. But then when you take a look at the archaeology coming out of Israel, this really, really, really makes it the lost sacrament of the ancient world that we're talking about here. In fact, I would argue the very tree of life. And why don't I share screen here again, and I'll go and show you some other images that I have. So in Israel, they have found a temple site. This is it in its original location, right? And this temple site showed residues on this smaller altar here of cannabis resin, and on this larger altar here of frankincense. Now, this was particularly interesting to me because for over a quarter century, I've been trying to explain this etymological case for cannabis through this Hebrew word, cannabosim. And this goes back to the works of the pioneering cannabis researcher and etymologist and anthropologist, Swami Bennett, who in the 1930s said that there were these references to cannabis under these terms, cannabosim and canna, that appeared in the Old Testament books of Exodus, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah, and the Song of Songs. And what was interesting to me when I first started studying these references and trying to understand them in the context of the narrative was that they conflicted. The initial reference in Exodus 30:23 is like an item of praise used in a holy anointing oil. But by the last of these references in Jeremiah 6:20, it's actually condemned. And this is interesting because this tells the story of the rise and fall of cannabis as a shamanic tool in the Judaic tradition. And so I'm just going to show you another picture here, just so
Talk a
you
little
get
bit
some
about
idea.
the holy
What's that?
anointing oil and how they made it. The holy
Yeah, I'm
anointing
going to
oil
get
and how
into
they
that,
made it.
but I just want you to see how big this temple actually is. So this is somebody sitting in there, right? Now this would have all been covered, right? So it's about the size of a walk-in closet. It could have got pretty smoky in there, right? The idea is to contain smoke. Now, I'm going to go through these references and explain how this relates to this site, because people are condemning, like they're saying that this doesn't count as part of the Jewish religion, because what this site reveals is the combined worship of Yahweh, God, with Asherah, who was a goddess that was worshipped at times in ancient Israel as God's wife. And so this is kind of a key element on what happens to it. Now, in the first of these references, Exodus 30:23, God, who first appears to Moses in flames of fire from within a burning bush, commands Moses to make this holy anointing oil with about 9 pounds of cannabis mixed into about 1.5 gallons of olive oil
Wow.
with myrrh and cinnamon and cassia. And every time that Moses is to speak to the Lord in the story, he's to put this holy oil on his body, and your skin's a big organ and some THC can't pass through. But he also takes some of this oil and he places it on the altar of incense. And then he speaks to the Lord in the pillar of smoke over the altar of incense. Later rabbinical writers will refer to the pillar of smoke as the Shekinah, and it refers to the physical presence of God in the temple. So God's only there when the smoke is burning out of this, on top of the altar in this tiny enclosed space called the tent of the meeting. Now, I don't know whether Moses is a historical figure or not, but this, I think, describes a ritual setting of the high priest and the inner temple in this time period and how cannabis was used in this way, right? Now, in the next of these references, I think I'm saying them in order here. I'd have to go look through, and you'll forgive me if I don't remember all the number of each verse of these references, but in the Ezekiel reference, cannabis appears as an item of trade, comes in on a caravan, right? And this is what they're saying about this cannabis in Israel, the archaeologists. is that this was not grown in Israel. There's no evidence in the strata of the soil, of pollen samples, that it was grown in the area. So it was something that was imported, right? And this likely accounts, like the Indo-European name for cannabis was Canna. K-A-N-N-A is how we would spell it, right? And this was adopted into the Hebrew language as Kana, which is Kaf Nun He in the Hebrew language. But basically, phonetically, the same word, right? Came as an item of trade, came as that, and that's what they knew it. And then they added on this adjective bosom, which means fragrant, to this term, right? And so that fits with this archaeology. Now, there is a reference, I think, in Ezekiel to entheogens. It's hard to say what it was, you know, and in Ezekiel 49, I think it is, he's given a scroll. It tastes as sweet as honey in his mouth when he eats it. He swallows it, it turns bitter in his stomach. And then he has this famous vision of the wheel with the four beasts around it, the man, the eagle, the lion, and the bull, you know. And that's, you know, he clearly ingested something before having that vision. And a Dr. C. Crichton writing in 1903, he suggested that he'd ingested hashish. Could have been any number of entheogens, I would think. You know, hard to argue for what it was, but the cannabis reference is interesting in Ezekiel as it describes it as an item of trade. Now, another reference occurs, I guess this was before the Ezekiel reference. Another reference occurs in the Song of Songs. And in the Song of Songs, it appears in a garden full of incense trees and in a grove growing, you know, and it says your ointment is more pleasing than any wine, you know, and things like that about it. Song of Songs is very interesting because some historians and biblical scholars believe the Song of Songs represents the Jewish counterpart of what was referred to as the Hieros Gamos. The Hieros Gamos means sacred marriage. And throughout the Middle East, the god of the gods, you know, the king of the gods often had a wife and was paired with that. You know, these ideas of monotheism, they weren't prevalent in this time period yet. And in Solomon, we're told Solomon burnt incense on high to the goddess and been swayed by his foreign wives and stuff like that. Archaeological evidence throughout Israel testifies to the widespread worship of the goddess in Israel throughout most of the period. And even in Kings and Chronicles in the Bible, there's constant complaints about the Asherah being within the temple itself, and they're condemning the Queen of Heaven throughout even the narrative. Now, the people that worshipped it, like Solomon, they didn't see it that way. They saw this was the normal form of worship, that the god and the goddess were worshipped side by side. And it's thought that the Song of Song represents that element, the marriage of Ishtar and Tammuz in Mesopotamia, and you know, in the Song of Songs, it's the Shulamite and the king. And so this is a kind of a key reference as well, right? Now in Isaiah, this is also an important reference because it shows how it's beginning to fall out of favor. And in Isaiah, God lambasts Isaiah, saying, "You have not brought any canna for me, but you have lavished, you know, you have placed the sins of your sins upon me." And you know, I forget the exact reference, but it's like basically saying, how can you come in here empty-handed without cannabis? And this is largely due to how popular it was with the competing cults. Throughout this time period, it's polytheistic in Israel. And everybody that has a different god or goddess wants this stuff because you bring that into the temple setting and the gods and goddesses speak a lot better, you know. And in regards to Asherah, William M. Bowden had a botanist. He wrote about how the priestesses of Asherah anointed their bodies with cannabis resins as well as burnt it. This is similar to the Hebrew use of it in Exodus, right? I don't know whether he's basing it on this reference in Jeremiah that I'm going on, or references to Kanabu, which is the Assyrian name for cannabis, that are made in reference to goddesses such as Ishtar and Isherah, which are other Near Eastern goddesses, probably related to Asherah. These are probably local names that take on their own kind of flavor in different regions, but all originating with the same earlier goddess, as they all kind of seem to have something to do with cannabis use. And Assyrian references to Kanabu do occur in reference to Ishtar, which is cannabis is in reference to Ishtar, the goddess there. Now, in Isaiah, there's probably a competition for this precious spice that's coming in on these trade caravans. In Isaiah, though, there is a reference that Isaiah likely did get high, and this time I think it makes more of a case for cannabis, because in a passage in Isaiah, it describes how one of the seraphim flew unto me with a live coal which he had taken from tongs from off the altar, and he laid it to my lips, and lo, my iniquity was taken away, and my sin was purged, right? So as soon as he took it and had it placed to his mouth with the tongs off the altar of incense, his sin and iniquity was taken away. Just what God said he wasn't going to relieve when he showed up empty-handed earlier in the narrative, right? And so then we get to the reference in Jeremiah 6:20. And in Jeremiah, he says, what do I care for your canna from a distant land? Your incense of Sheba does not please me. So here again, we see it as an item of trade. Incense of Sheba, likely a reference to Solomon's wife, Queen of Sheba, one of Solomon's wives, and goddess worship and all that type of tie-in. And we can be pretty sure that this is all tied in with goddess worship, because in Jeremiah 44, Jeremiah is lambasting Israelites who've escaped the slaughter in Israel that was taking place under Assyrians and Babylonians at the time, for continuing to worship the King of Heaven and burn incense and pour out drink offerings to him. So it's really specific here. The people respond to Jeremiah and say, we will continue to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, as did their kings and princes before us, and our fathers and mothers. And so this to them was the normal form of worship, and the monotheistic worship that Jeremiah was preaching was something new to them. And it's important to remember that even in the Old Testament narrative of Kings and Chronicles, there's only two kings that are monotheistic reformers, Hezekiah and Josiah, a grandfather and grandson. And Hezekiah, he destroyed the brazen serpent that Moses made because the people were burning incense to it. And he destroyed the Asherah that was in the temple and the groves of trees that were holy to the Asherah worshippers, right? And this is all pretty clear in there, right? And so this is a pogrom, I think, about the worship of the goddess and her sacred plant, which probably predated the worship of Yahweh in Israel, because the goddess worship goes way, way back in time in these regions, right? And even Sula Bennett believed that the ritual use of cannabis grew out of what she referred to as the matriarchal circle, this earlier period of goddess worship, where the goddess was more the supreme deity than the male god, right? And so what we see is this transition between the male god and the goddess, goddess worship to the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, to solely God worship taking place over this time period. And probably some of this monotheism had to do with political pressures of the time. You got to remember, there was no division between religion and politics in this time period. And whose ever cult had the ear of the king kind of had the power over the kingdom. But in this time period, Israel was particularly under attack by more powerful kingdoms. Assyria, Babylonia, Egypt, a variety of much more powerful kingdoms. And there may have been some desire to consolidate the religion in a way that they could be a consolidated force politically, right? And there's evidence of this. People have argued that the book of Deuteronomy, which led to a lot of these monotheistic reforms, was a forgery. It was written in a later style of Hebrew, found in what was said to be the Temple of Solomon and written by Moses. But we've seen how Solomon was condemned for his polytheistic worship of the goddess, and even the brazen serpent Moses made was destroyed in these reforms because people were burning incense to it. And one of the last things written, for the Old Testament text is actually the Garden of Eden myth. And some historians now suggest that the whole Eden myth may be a reversal of this earlier mythology involving Asherah, because Asherah's key symbol was the tree of life. She's depicted as the tree of life herself, holding grains in her hand as goats from it, and sometimes as a sacred tree itself. So she was the tree of life. The whole Eden mythology with its prohibition of the sacred trees could well be a revisioning of this cultic relationship, demonized by monotheistic reformers that came to write the Bible in the closing period of that era.
That was after the Babylonian captivity, when the Babylonians took most of the Jewish leaders back to what we call Iran today, right? Persia.
Yeah.
And they got into this, the Mesopotamian Valley, and they got in and they found new parts of the Old Testament. And that's the Deuteronomy you're talking about. And that became the male dominant religion prior to that. And I remember reading the Bible more recently, and I say, and they were condemned for worshiping the Queen of Heaven, right? You keep mentioning that. And, you know, I've been initiated into the worship of the goddess, but I grew up in a Christian family. So I'm reading that, and it's like this whole guilt thing comes on. Oh, you can't worship the divine feminine. God forbids that. And then you get punished for that. But that's a new thing in the Testament, right? And it's very
well. Ezra was kind of like a reformer. He got sent over by the Persian kings into Israel to bring this monotheistic religion in, right? And the whole like Persian region and much of these other areas, they had gone through similar monotheistic reforms under Zoroaster just before this, right? And Moses himself, that's why I'm like a bit like cautious referring to him as an actual historical figure. He's almost like a Canaanite Zoroaster, reforming the indigenous polytheistic religion into a monotheistic one. And it's interesting with Ezra, because two different scholars, more than a century apart, have suggested that this wine infusion, this fiery cup, was actually a cannabis infusion in the story of Ezra. And a guy, George W. Brown, writing it around the 1890, he wrote about this, and a Brazilian scholar, Vicente Dubraca, he without even knowing about Brown's work, almost repeated it exactly based on the same stuff. And we know that the Persian Zoroastrians used cannabis-infused wines because there's actual texts referring to the use of these cannabis-infused wines. And in the Talmud, there's references to how the one on the way to execution would get wine with incense placed into it to ease his pain. And in the book of Amos, it's referred to how the priests are drinking the wine of the condemned within the temple. So it obviously had entheogenic effects as well as pain relieving, right?
Is that what they gave Jesus on the cross? A sponge full of this entheogenic, whatever it was. So he tripped out of his body.
This is something that I've written about, you know, like Professor Hugh Schoenfield. He wrote a book in the 60s, The Passover Plot, that suggested that when Jesus was on the cross, he was given some sort of potion that enabled him to go into like a coma-like state that fooled the Romans into thinking he was dead. And this accounts for the miracle of the resurrection. Now, it's interesting because the first written about anesthetic was actually a cannabis-infused wine. This was in China from about the 2nd century AD. And they were using cannabis-infused wine for complicated medical operations and things like that. And in these Zoroastrian accounts of cannabis-infused wines, they're often given a few cups of it. The people that take it are described in a death-like state, referred to as starred, that they're in this like death-like coma. And then when they wake up, they say the vision that they had. And so this is very similar to doing that, you know, and this is kind of the basic story of the Hashashin as well, which likely grew out of these earlier Persian accounts. They're given the wine, they think they died, and people think they died, and they go to heaven and they see all the virgins, and then they wake up again, and it's a similar type of situation, and it's likely to carry over in Islam of this earlier use.
Yeah, the Sufis still use the cannabis. You tell that story a little bit more detail, would you, Chris, about the mountain and the monks and when and all that?
Yeah. Well, these are accounts that you have to remember come from European people that were not exactly friendly to the group known as the Hashishin. And our accounts are,
Anti-propaganda, yeah.
yeah, Arthur of Lubeck, I think in around the 12th century, and then Marco Polo, I think in around the 13th century. But the basic story is there was an old man of the mountain, this figure, the leader of the Hashishin. And whenever he wanted to get a new devotee to follow his orders, he would get a young man from the town and he'd woo him with a little talk, and then he would give him this drink, and the guy would pass out, and then he would wake up inside this secret garden, which was inside the mountaintop castle that he had, where there was a stream flowing with wine, and there were naked women, and they thought that they had died and gone to heaven. And then they would drug him again, and he would say, see, you have seen paradise, and if you follow my orders, you'll be allowed to re-gore there. And then the story is they'd be so loyal that they do anything for the guy, right? Now, the Hashishin is a kind of a controversial heretical group, and they did practice it. The root word for assassin and hashish comes from the same root word, Hashishin, because they were like a small little heretical sect dealing with much bigger groups. And so they wouldn't win on the battlefield. What they did is they practiced infiltration and assassination. And so they would infiltrate the Sultan's household, and then he'd wake up with a pillow, a note in his pillow with a knife there saying, you better do what we say, or, that's the story, right? Now, this is, largely thought to be the creation of European and also Islamic groups which were against it. And many people writing about the Hashishin say this was just an insult hurled at them, that they were drug takers. But I think that a lot of these people don't really realize the entheogenic and spiritual history of cannabis. And there is evidence that we know, like probably the best book on hashish in Islam is this book here, The Herb Hashish versus Medieval Muslim Society by Franz Rosenthal. And it's a text from, medieval period forward about hashish on both sides of the equation. And there's clearly many proponents of hashish that saw it as a sacred substance. And they argued that unlike alcohol, it was not a forbidden substance. Alcohol is strictly forbidden in the Hadith literature. And there's a lot of myths about how it came into use. And, generally most of this stuff is all kind of out of this Persian region, which the use of cannabis by Zoroastrians for entheogenic purposes seems to have been going on right up to the point of period of Islam's arrival, right? And there's this drink in Islam that was called nabid. And it was, here, I'll read you just a little bit about it. This is from the Encyclopedia of Islam. Nabid, a comprehensive designate for an intoxicating drinks, several kinds of which were produced in early Arabia, such as miz from barley and bit from honey, and some from dates. These ingredients were steeped in water until they were fermented, and the result of this procedure was a slightly intoxicating drinks. These drinks were also combinations of raisins, dates, and honey to be found. Nabid was sometimes consumed mixed with strong intoxicating ingredients like St. John's wort or different kinds of cannabis, so that it had strong intoxicating and hallucinogenic effects. Okay, just 1 second here. Nabid was also a beverage that was offered to the pilgrims in Mecca. The institution of Al-Siqta, also the name of the building close to Zamzam, where the distribution took place, was an office held by the Abbas family. The descriptions of Ibn Sabad give the impressions that this thing had fallen by 1000 AD. This practice had already passed into destitute. So around 1000 AD, there was some sort of prohibition in Mecca against these sorts of intoxicating substances. Now, it's interesting, although hashish wasn't prohibited, if you made it into a drink like this nabid that they're talking about, it did become prohibited. And nabid is also something that Muhammad himself is referred to as drinking. So it's really interesting. And in the Dabistan, a 16th century text of Islamic folklore from India, they describe an event taking place where Muhammad is with naked sadhus, and they are making bong, but they have nothing to filter the bong with. So Muhammad takes his turban off of his head, and they filter it through his turban, turning his turban green. And this is given as the reason why Muhammad's subtribe, the Hashim, have green turbans. Is going back to this account of Muhammad pressing bong with sadhus in India from the Dabistan.
That's the color. Still in India, the color green is associated with the Islamic religion, and the Indian national flag has the orange for the Hindu sadhus, the green for the Muslims, and the white for everybody else.
Nice. Yeah, well, there's a figure in Islamic literature, Al-Qadar, and he's the patron saint of cannabis, and getting high to some Sufis was referred to as a visit from Al-Qadar, and it basically means the green one. And so he's kind of like the Islamic green man. He's in all sorts of funny tales and things.
Yeah, well, that's like the giant green stalk. What is it? Jack and the Beanstalk, and that whole thing. People think that's a cannabis story.
Well, a lot of these fairy tales go way back. In the original earlier versions of Rumpelstiltskin, he's actually using not straw but hemp to weave golden thread. And some of these stories go like these. I have like a chapter dealing with some of these folk tales and their origins, right? But you got to think nobody was weaving straw on a spinning wheel. That's the story that we got. That never happened. So it was obviously hemp in the beginning, but there's actual earlier versions of the story where they referred to it as hemp and a golden thread made from it.
Right. Well, Jack and the Beanstalk, he has 3 seeds, right?
Yeah.
And he trades his cow for these 3 seeds.
Sacred
like
cow.
a cow, a super valuable thing, right? So he gets and then if you've ever grown hemp or cannabis, that tiny little seed can be a 15-foot plant if you do it right. So, but where does it go? It goes up into the heavens, right? And that's where cannabis takes you. It's really far out.
Yeah, well, and then he fights, you fight the giant of your ego and you get the golden heart if you win.
Right. It's fun. It's so far. It's great how this can't. Now, the thing I want to say is that all this that we've been talking about has been hidden from us for a couple of 100 years, or maybe not even that much, but certainly for the last 100 years, we haven't known any of this kind of stuff. It's been maybe in remote and esoteric scholarly circles and so on. So we owe Chris a tremendous debt for kind of collecting all this knowledge and putting it in all of his several books that we'll give you a list of. And so one of his most recent books is the Liber 420. And that's about the cannabis use for all of the alchemists. And that's where they were into cannabis tinctures and all of these amazing things. And so the whole medical use of cannabis, which we're now exploring and rediscovering, it's actually thousands of years old, that use of it. So the parallel use, you mentioned fiber, and then we have medical, and then we have the spiritual. And there's no other plant on the planet that comes even close to that. That's food, medicine, building material, and spiritual enlightenment. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when you think about things you could get involved with in life to try and heal the planet, it's just like I initially got involved because of the environmental causes, seeing all the deforestation here in British Columbia and how we could take 1 acre of hemp and save 4 acres of trees, producing more paper than they could produce over the same 20-year period, or we can move away from fossil fuels, or we can move away from soil depleting cotton, or we could feed the world's hungry with one of the most digestible proteins on the planet. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
it's like this whole medical aspect, you know, like parents treating their children with epilepsy, man. That's as much as a miracle to them as Jesus casting out a demon was to somebody in the time of Jesus using the holy oil. You know what I mean? And the same thing, likely. You know, glaucoma, so many diseases, you know, even like the lessening of pain, you know what I mean? In deadly diseases, you can get off all the opiates and use cannabis medicines, and its effects for cancer too. We're just kind of starting to discover that. And then to discover this like whole hidden spiritual history, you know, it's always been, I've known about this stuff for a long time, but I've always kind of thought that people would have to know about the industrial aspects of this plant, the medical aspects of this plant before they'd ever be able to hear the message of this religious history, you know. And luckily at the same time I've been collecting all this information, this incredible archaeology has been coming up out of the world, revealing the lost sacrament of the ancient world. And it's important to remember in regards to Israel that that find in the 8th century BC temple site in Arad, Jerusalem is not the only archaeological evidence we have out of Israel. There's actually archaeological evidence from 4th century AD from Bet Shemesh, Jerusalem. And there it was found in a tomb of a young woman who died during childbirth. And it was being used topically on her abdomen, as well as being burnt inside the chamber where she was entombed. So this shows like a continued use in the Holy Land, going from 8th century BC until 4th century AD. And this brings us into the time of Jesus, you know, and one of the names of Jesus is the Christ, and the Christ is just the Greek version of a Hebrew term. The Messiah means the anointed one, and refers to this anointing oil, which we're talking about in Exodus 30:23. And it's important to remember that in the Bible narrative, Jesus doesn't baptize anybody, but in the oldest of the Gospels, the Gospel of Mark, he sends out the 12 apostles with oil to cast out demons and heal the sick. Now, casting out demons in those days likely was a reference to this treatment of epilepsy, which I was talking about. And we see references to this in Assyrian literature, where they refer to it as the hand of ghost. It was thought a ghost was placing his hand on you and it'd make you shake, you know. And they treated this there with topical cannabis ointment, 6th century before the time of Jesus, you know. And the alchemist Paracelsus, he actually had a quintessence, a tincture of cannabis that he prescribed for epilepsy in the 16th century. So we can see on either side of this, people were clearly aware of this particular aspect of it, you know. And one of the
I want to talk about the holy anointing oil in terms of, say, Jesus or the priest when they go into the temple. They were told to put the holy anointing on their temples, on their third eye, and on their wrists. And these are all highly sensitive places. And so when you get in there, any king, you're going to have an out-of-body experience. You really are you're going to see God in that way, influenced by this. And that would make you presumably a better king. And certainly it would like raise your consciousness in a way. And so it was, the anointment was this way of giving you a Christ consciousness because you had an out-of-body experience where you had a direct entheogenic thing.
Yeah, well, the Holy Spirit is upon me, is how they said, you know, the Holy Spirit is upon me because I've been anointed. That was how it got into you, you know what I mean? So it's pretty clearly part of it, you know. And now a lot of people don't realize in the first few centuries AD, there were all sorts of different Christian groups. Just one version of Christianity survived. And this was brought to us by the adoption of Christianity as a state religion of the Roman Empire, which had been persecuting Christianity. And when they took it over, a state religion, you know, kind of like corporate cannabis, they took a lot of the soul out of the whole thing. And they not only prohibited pagan groups that were using entheogenic substances, but they prohibited a whole array of Christian groups known under the collective title of Gnosticism. Gnosticism is a blanket term for a variety of Christian groups. There's some commonalities in Gnostic worship, but they have varying beliefs. But one of the commonalities was anointing versus water baptism. In Gnostic texts, it says there is fire in the anointing oil, but there is only water in the baptism. And through the anointing oil, we're initiated into unfading bliss. And they refer to it as the straightener of crooked limbs. So it was clearly something with both entheogenic and healing properties, And in one text in the Nag Hammadi library, rediscovered Gnostic texts that were found in 1945 that survived the Roman Catholic pogroms. Jesus is described as giving the apostles a box full of unguents and medicines. And he says, you got to heal the body before you can heal the soul. And he sends them off into the city to heal with these unguents that he's given in this box of unguents. So it's pretty clear that they required, physical preparations, you know what I mean? And in other texts, like the second book of Jude, it describes Jesus in initiations where they're putting vine branches into wine bottles and burning incense that contained a wonder, putting plants that we no longer know what the names mean in the mouths of participants, both men and women, worshiping side by side equally. And that's another big difference between Gnosticism. We've already talked about the suppression of the goddess in the Old Testament period, and I think we all can, relate to the crime of the prohibition of an entheogen like cannabis. But when we talk about the suppression of the goddess in the religious life of humanity, that's probably the greatest crime, religious crime in the history of the world, is the desacralization of the feminine, And I really think that this plant here that we cultivate for feminine purposes is in a way the reemergence of that goddess, But in Gnosticism, men and women were equal. In fact, Jesus refers to Mary Magdalene as the premier disciple, the disciple above all other disciples. And
she had a direct line. She had a direct line. So I want to say a couple of things in there first, Chris, is that revival of the use of spiritual Christian cannabis is being done all over the United States, you probably know. And we have Mickey Norris on, who's one of the founders of Cannabis, which we've been working with also in sacred ritual and creating a ritual for cannabis and so on. But I want to ask you a question, Chris. We also, all of our guests, we ask, how old were you when you first smoked? Where were you and who turned you on?
Okay. When I first started smoking herb, I was like 12 years old. And I was very anti-cannabis prior to that time. And I found some herb in my brother's drawer and I was devastated. I was like, oh, my brother's on drugs, man. What am I going to do? And a couple of kids in my school were smoking it. And I called them up and this stops right here, man. Any more of this stuff? And now it's all, I'm turning you in. But somehow my curiosity got pegged and I started smoking cannabis at 12 years old. But, you mentioned Nikki Morris. I just want to point out that it was actually her husband, Chris Conrad, was the first person that I ever saw talk about the wonders of the hemp plant. And this was in like 1989, 1990. And that was, before that, I think cannabis was just something I used. I guess I always had an inkling about it, but I quit sometimes thinking it was like a drug and I want to kind of get straight and that sort of thing. It was after I found out about hemp and started researching that I started embracing it as a religious sacrament. So I just want to throw a shout out to Chris Conrad there as an early inspiration for me.
Yeah, really, that's great. And he's still going strong, actually. Some of the people on this call are also on the Namaste group, and we meet from time to time as the spirit moves us, as we say, for all of cannabis events. So any of you who are on this session, you're all welcome to be part of it. And if you need to know about it, you can email us and we can get the link for that as well. And actually Omar's been on some of the calls, and Dr. Detroit and Gail are, who's that?
Karen.
Oh yeah, Karen Byers also. So many people come in from time to time, and it's just a wonderful thing to acknowledge and smoke cannabis with a spiritual intent right out in front. And Chris, do you want to mention the names of some of your books so that people want to look at them, find them, and so on? So I mean, it just gets deeper and deeper, everybody.
My first book came out in 1995, and that was called Green Gold: The Tree of Life, Marijuana, and Magic and Religion. Then that was followed by Sex, Drugs, Violence in the Bible at about 2001, and this is where I really explored the whole cannabisum thing and the relationship with the goddess. Then Cannabis in the Soma solution. I don't see that here. Here it is. This was 2010. And
Great book. That's a
yeah,
great
thanks so
book.
much. And then my last book was, that you mentioned earlier, Liber 420, and that came out in 2018. And
that's right.
I thought I was just going to maybe be able to get a chapter out of the alchemical and magical stuff in the medieval and Renaissance period when I started that book, but then it ended up being this 800-page volume that I couldn't believe. Like I'd already known quite a bit about cannabis history from my other books, but there was just a wealth of material that had not been translated out of Latin in alchemical texts, and I think there still is. I probably just scratched the surface of what's there in some of these older texts, and I'm sure that more great history is going to be revealed by other researchers.
Roman doctors, Roman physicians traveling with the army and using that and trading with the Persians and so on, because the Rome invaded Persia. So there was this, we don't understand how much trade and communication there was in those old days. And you mentioned the steppes of Russia, and we see the steppes because we've had anti-communist propaganda first that we grew up with. The steppes were like the end of the world, and there was just nothing there, just this barren thing. But actually the steppes of Russia all the way across Ukraine, Romania, the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, that was the center of civilization for thousands of years. It's where horse riding developed. It's where weaving developed. It's where ceramics developed. It's where bronzeware developed. It's amazing center culture. And we have just rediscovering that as well. It's really thrilling.
Yeah, it's incredible stuff, man, and it's great to see so much of this archaeology coming out too about this and rediscovering our past. We're lucky to be in a liberated age where we can actually discuss these things.
Right. And we get access to Russian archaeologists, which we didn't have under the Soviet communists and so on. You mentioned about horses, and when they domesticated the horse, they needed a bit. But but the thing is that most other things, leather will stretch when it gets wet, but hemp rope as a bit in the horse won't stretch. So actually hemp was really important in the domestication of the horse and the reins and all the gear and so on. So it's just really important for and weaving too seems to have the oldest fabric they found is like what, 20,000 in BC that they found hemp fabric woven together.
Elizabeth Whalen Barber, who's probably the foremost textile expert in the world, she said that there's tools that are used for breaking the fibers from hemp stock that can be dated to 28,000 years ago. There's claims of hemp rope in Czechoslovakia 24,000 years ago. And then in Taiwan, we have evidence of hemp cloth from about 12,000 years ago. And then in Cattle Hayak in Turkey from 12,000 years ago. Now that shows in these two diverse populations that people were already weaving cannabis, you know what I mean? So where did that start? You know what I mean? And these dates too, along with the ritual use I talked about, these are only what we have based on archaeology. You know what I mean? Who knows when these things originally started? Dr. Jeffrey Guy, head of GW Pharmaceuticals, and the well-known cannabis researcher, Dr. John McPartland, they actually have a theory that cannabis was part of the Great Leap Forward. That's when humanity, moved out of the caves and started becoming civilized and controlling fire and inventing the wheel. And they think that cannabis may have created like new thought patterns, novel ways of thinking to approach problems and that sort of thing. It's only a theory at this date, but the way that the cannabinoid system and the endocannabinoid system have developed alongside each other and our thousands and thousands of year-old relationship with this plant may be indications of some sort of connected evolutionary process between us and this herb.
So Chris, would you say the same thing is true of psychedelic mushrooms, for example, and other?
Well, I think that it's like I'm a big lover of psychedelic mushrooms. When it comes to like archaeological and textual stuff, I'm kind of like on the strong side of proof. I think there's a lot of evidence for the ritual use of mushrooms, in South America and North America, artifacts and other things testifying that. I don't think that there's any evidence in my reading of both the Avesta and the Vedas for soma as a mushroom, although I think other plants besides cannabis were in use. I don't think there's a case like that's popularly being made for biblical use of it, you know, at least based on the biblical text. Mostly this type of stuff is like based on medieval paintings and poorly drawn trees that people are saying indicate mushrooms, and somehow this indicates mushroom use in the biblical period. You find very few of these people pointing to actual references in passages that are indicative of this. Probably the most famous one's manna, but it's kind of iffy even in regards to entheogenic. You know, the miracle is that they got some food. So, you know, there's some cave paintings, you know, that are very old that I do think may be indicative of possibly of mushrooms, but stuff like that, really hard to say. What's nice about plants like cannabis, for instance, is there's actual textual references. You know what I mean? We know what the word was in some of these time periods, and it's in, you know, Zoroastrian texts, or it's in Vedic texts, and it's in, you know, ancient Hindu texts as well. You know, and we know it because of the names. Then we have actual archaeological evidence, and this is another area that a lot of this these mushroom claims fail, is not having this sort of like archaeological backup or textual backup, you know. And it's not just cannabis that we can show this type of stuff for. Henbane, mandrake, opium, all these plants. We know that they knew about them because they wrote about it, and there's archaeological evidence of their use.
Yeah, well, I want to talk a little bit about, we here at Turtle Creek, we have a goddess, Ganja Ma, that appeared to us here, and she's a form of the goddess, one of the goddesses of India, Rajarajaswari, the Queen of Queens, or the Queen of Heaven. And so we've dedicated, we call her Ganja Ma, and she carries ganja stalks and flowers in her hands. And we put her on top of a stack of pyramids like the Sri Yantra in our garden. And the garden itself is shaped like the Sri Yantra. And then we have a prayer, we have a mantra for her, Om Aim Hrim Klim Shrim Ganjamaye Namah, which we plant, we put on the seeds and so on. So, and then we take water from the sacred Ganges River and we put them on the seeds. So that's like taking this, putting the spiritual thing into cannabis right from the very beginning, before the seeds are even cracked. And the design and the layout of the garden is the Sri Yantra, the sacred diagram, which is the male and female, the Shiva Shakti energy. And so cannabis as a goddess, Ganja Ma, we're reviving that. And through things like, you know, Kanamaste and various other groups, I think it's alive now, and it's going also with the revival of the realization that women hold up half the heaven, as they say, and it's the empowerment of the divine feminine. And cannabis, like you just said, is definitely leading in that awareness.
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of the powerful women proponents of cannabis are a testament to that. You know, it's a real, you see that a lot more in this movement than other movements, I believe.
So I just want to say something. Hi, that's great, Chris. I realize I've seen you in this book. So I want to tell everyone he's also second chapter in this book. Great. Like I got a summary. But I wanted to just comment. So you're talking about the archaeological evidence. I heard Graham Hancock, who's a quote forbidden archaeologist, mention that they found evidence of DMT in some of the archaeological statues dating back to ancient times. But he said that his hypothesis was that the use of these consciousness raising plants came during eras or times when there was a great flourishing of consciousness. So when they were withdrawn, we would go through a restriction of freedom and a restriction of thought and consciousness. And when they were released, then the planet would go through, you know, an expansion of consciousness, which is pretty exciting since we're moving into the Aquarian age, and they're still trying to clamp it down, but they actually can't. So there's an explosion. So I just thought that was really interesting. I loved hearing how it's been used since the beginning of time. Like Moses, really? Okay, yes.
That burning bush, what was that about?
Well,
Well, they use Moses to say the first 5 books of the Tanakh, what we call in Christian the Old Testament, that was all written by Moses in order to put a unity onto it, which it doesn't have, right? And Chris had mentioned that probably the Garden of Eden section is a much later thing. Deuteronomy is now coming into question through stylistic analysis. Even within. Go ahead.
Well, add it with the Anunnaki gods, and then maybe you can say that the aliens and the extraterrestrials brought this plant down to humanity to raise our consciousness.
Or maybe they came to the planet to get the plant. Maybe
Of
because it
course,
grows
'cause
here.
it's
They
a
came here to
weed.
take it back with them.
Right, they're drug smuggling it back to their galaxy.
It's the spice. It's the spice
That's
for
right.
everyone. So, and this is the only
That's
place you
right.
can get it in the universe.
Have an interesting relationship with time, you know. Father Time holds a scythe, which is a tool used for harvesting cannabis. And one of the things Anslinger was complaining about jazz musicians was they were messing with time by working in extra beats in their jazz drumming, you know. And one of the first things that Novus users notice is a differentiation in time. You know, a minute seems like an hour seems like a minute. And you know, it's interesting because Carl Sagan, he speculated that perhaps cannabis was our first cultivated crop. And he used the pygmies as an example because the pygmies, they said that they'd been using cannabis since the dawn of time. And this likely means their perception of time, because from archaeological evidence, it's thought that the cannabis didn't really make it into that region until the Islamic period, when Islamic traders came through with it. The pygmies, when they began using it ritually, actually began cultivating it because they couldn't count on hunter-gatherer finding it out in the jungle. And so they wanted it. And so they started planting a crop of it. And this led to their cultivation of other plants. And the pygmies say that they've been, you know, using cannabis since the dawn of time, and that God gave the pygmies cannabis so that they would be healthy and happy. And so, yeah, it's kind of like almost like a birth of a religion.
Yeah. Well, I think there's good evidence that cannabis was involved in the discovery of agriculture too, because first of all, the seeds are so big and obvious. Some other plants have minuscule seeds, and you could easily carry a bunch of those seeds, and probably it was the women doing it from camp to camp on these nomadic peoples, and they would just throw them out and get rid of them. And then lo and behold, they come back next year and there's this thing growing, right? And they put 2 and 2 together and so on. And you use the word a scythe, and people think that word comes from the Scythians. So it was the scythe to cut the cannabis that was used by the Scythians who used the cannabis.
Yeah. You know, a lot of the funeral sites, they have like a little bag of hemp seeds. Like this was to help you on the other world so that you'd have them to plant there because you didn't want to be without that. The other world would suck without cannabis.
Exactly, for sure. And that's why the aliens came here, to get our harvest. They
That's
still
right.
come up to the Emerald Triangle. There's a whole lot of alien stories up here in the Emerald Triangle about them coming to get the harvest. So anyway.
Yeah, Chris, we could talk forever about
Oh,
this.
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
we're gonna have to ask you to come back again for part 2, because
Yeah.
this is really fascinating
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, thank you all for
Yeah.
coming. And
Thank you so much.
Chris, how can they access your sources? You have an email or something like that, or a
Sure, I have
website?
if you want a blog, it'll cover a lot of the article type of information that I have. I have a blog over at cannabisculture.com. If you search my name at cannabisculture.com, you should be able to find it. Social media, I have a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook account. I'm probably most active on Facebook. I can't always accept friend requests. I'm often at the 5,000 mark. But follow me, and I'm always posting interesting stuff about cannabis history on there.
Right. And his books are available in many, many places, and they're just a great read. They're well written and totally beautiful research and so on. So can't say enough about it, Chris. And thank you so much. But we do want to mention our next guest in 2 weeks.
In a couple of weeks, we're going to be having Colin Wells, who's a veteran, and that's going to be very interesting. He's gets a lot of cannabis to veterans and takes them on these walking and talking tours where they take hikes in the hills and just basically to heal them from PTSD and other causes. So as always, this sacred plant continues to heal the world in so many ways. And we just love to be able to share that information. And as Chris points out, it goes back forever.
From the very beginning. So
Yeah. So thank
anyway,
you, everybody.
thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks, and have a lovely evening, and keep smoking or drinking or however it is you want to take this stuff, because it's the elixir of immortality.
No less. Really. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you,
Much
Christina.
love.
Much
All right.
love.
Thanks so much for having me.